Thank you. Thanks so much for coming out today, particularly through the deluge that we had a few minutes ago. So I'm going to hit the ground running by, rather than talking, I think, initially about the various strategies and processes of how to apply to college in the United States, I thought we would actually just do it. We would go through a portion of what it's like to actually go through the application process. And the one major point I think that's worth spending time on is the personal statement. So you have before you an example of a successful personal statement. This was, and if anyone doesn't have one, does anyone need one? You good? This is an example of a personal statement. The student will be attending Harvard University in the fall. She's from Vietnam. Just for context, her SAT on the old score, no longer the current score, was a 2320. So what I want you to do is take a second, read it, and then we're going to talk about it, and we're going to do a little bit of analysis and look at, first, we'll go through this in a moment, but I want you to keep in mind three things, and these are the three things that I think can be the easiest tools to deploy when you're writing an essay for college. And those three things are content, what you're writing about, right? Structure, how you're writing about it, how you're having your topics talk to one another and flow, and style, right? What your voice is, what particular approach you're using in vocalizing your ideas, right? So take a moment, read through it, and then we're going to talk about it. I'll put it up on the screen. Okay. So before we jump into the analysis of content structure and style, I want to talk about the three different themes. This is how I talk about college applications and the different ways that applicants are going to be assessed. There's kind of three different themes that you might think about in terms of how profiles are considered by an application committee. And they fall also into kind of the six different aspects of that go into an application, right? So these six different applications or aspects are what we mostly think of, right? Grades and transcripts. Most students who are in the middle of their high school or JC or post-secondary time are thinking about their grades and been thinking about their grades for the last many years of their education. They're also thinking about their test scores, right? ACTs, SATs, and then increasingly O-levels, A-levels, and we'll be talking about those a little bit more later. And those all fall under the academic category, right? And that's meant to kind of assess your intellectual vitality, your ability to achieve juxtaposed with your peers, right? And also take advantage of the opportunities in your particular school. Then we kind of have these other categories, what I call leadership and character. And leadership and character are really assessed in two different ways. One are your activities, right? We call them co-curricular activities in Singapore for the most part. Some people call them extracurricular activities. And really this is meant to assess how you spend your time, right? What you're dedicated to, what you've chosen to either in a service capacity or in a skills capacity. It could be sports, it could be music, a variety of other things. But really outside of school, what has been pulling on your time and helping cultivate your character over the course of many years. Then we have also the other very, very important aspect of assessing your character, the letters of recommendation. Now, the reason letters of recommendation are so important is because we have adults talking to adults, right? So your teachers assessing your character, assessing your ability to participate and contribute to a community. We'll talk a little bit more about community a little bit later. But those two things really speak to your character. And character is really important because when we're thinking about, and this is very unique, I think, to an American school, when we're thinking about admitting students, we're really thinking about admitting people who are going to be members of our community, right? And American colleges, liberal arts colleges in particular, have an enormous focus, not just on the academic capacity of their students, but on their ability to contribute to their peers' education, to contribute to the community more broadly. And then we have what I call growth and values. This is a little bit more abstract, but it's also very important. Growth and values are really, this is the thing that you can't articulate about you, but that is the most vital to who you are, right? What can't we understand about you through your scores, through your activities, through your letters of recommendation? And this is why we have the personal statement and the supplementary essays. They're opportunities for candidates in their own words, to discuss something that is of vital significance to them, but can't be quantified elsewhere. So we call this growth and values. It's really your opportunity to demonstrate what is most important to you. So I want to take a look back now and look at this personal statement. There's a lot that I love about this personal statement. I think the first thing to point out is it perfect? Is it a perfect essay? Not really, but what is it functioning to do? And how do we know that this essay is an asset to the applicant, right? So from the content of structure and style, again, content is what you write and why you write about it, right? The topic that you choose to discuss, and from paragraph to paragraph, how that topic evolves, right? So it's not one static line throughout the entire essay, but it's something that grows, comes to a crescendo, right? And many people are familiar with the 5-paragraph format. This has a little bit more flexibility. But the idea here is, in a very particular form, 650 words, a very limited length, how do you choose to articulate something of value? Structure, again, is how that content flows, and you can get at a very, very granular level. You can look from sentence to sentence, from paragraph to paragraph, or you can look from maybe section to section, and we'll talk a little bit about sections in this last essay in a moment. Then style, again, is your voice, right? Your voice, your style, your technique, really your use of language, right? How are you choosing to use language in a way that feels authentic to you, right? Is a way that expresses something that you feel like might not be able to be expressed in another way. So let's just break down this essay a little bit in terms of content, right? So the most obvious content, the topic that we're discussing, or that this student is discussing, is Buddhism, right? And her Buddhist practice. But probably more importantly is how taking responsibility for the cultivation of a Buddhist practice informed her ability to be of service to her family, right? So we have this kind of arc and already a thematic connectivity from beginning to end of a young woman, and we get to see growth over time, right? A young woman in the early stages of her childhood, experiencing Buddhism, finding an affinity there, right? Finding something that called to her, then taking greater responsibility. In the second paragraph, we see her going to Tao Pagoda in Hunan province, taking on greater responsibility for learning meditation. And then she also has this instructive quality, right? So for those of us who are maybe not familiar with Buddhism, she teaches us, right, what is exactly for her important, the breathing aspects of meditation, the attention to her posture, right? So for those of us who might be on the outside of Buddhism, she spends a couple of sentences providing access to an experience that might otherwise be remote for us. Then she makes this segue here, and this what I'm going to call the second section of the essay. And here's where we start to kind of understand, why did she choose to share this topic with us? Why is this really important? It's not just to say, hey, I practice Buddhism, look at me. It's not a pat on the back so much as it is to say, it turns out this was really useful. So now we're intersecting different areas in her life. We've seen her in her younger years. We've seen her take greater responsibility as she's getting older. And now we see application, right? So as she enters high school, she says, a series of unsettling events required her to call upon the mindfulness, the consideration of thought, the ability to serve others that she had cultivated in Buddhism. So now we're connecting different areas in her life. And again, now she's giving us a little bit more of an intimate experience into her family. Does she spend a lot of time here? Not really, but she gives us just enough detail to know that there was a unique set of circumstances, unforeseen, where she was put into a caregiving position for her family, first for her father, then for her grandmother. Now I think at this point, one of the things I want to ask is this a unique topic, right? One of the questions I get asked most frequently by students is, what's a unique topic for me to write about my essays, right? What should I write my essays about? And the important thing to know is there's actually no such thing as a unique topic, unfortunately. If you think about it from an admissions officer's perspective, if you're an admissions officer and you've been doing your job for 3 or 4 years and you go through 1,500, 2,000 applications a year, pretty much seen it all, topic-wise. So we want to shift the focus away from finding a unique topic to finding a unique expression. And so what's valuable about this essay is not that she's sharing something with us like she went to the moon. If you've gone to the moon, definitely write about that. But in the off chance that you haven't gone to the moon, you talk about something that is perhaps maybe mundane, but it is of personal value to you, right? That expression that you're going to bring to it is the value. And that's why we call it a personal statement, right? It's not just a statement, it's a personal statement. And so what we're assessing here when we look through this essay is, where do we find access to her character? Where do we find pieces of her that as an admissions officer we can infer that she's going to bring these characteristics, these traits to campus, right? So the first one here that we want to really point out is the idea of service. Does she talk about service as such? Not really. She doesn't say, hey, service is really important to me. She doesn't say, hey, let's talk about all the volunteer experiences that I've done and how impactful they were on my life. But we actually see her providing service to her family and our loved ones. And we're pretty smart as admissions people, so we know if she's capable of doing this for her family selflessly and in a way that's not egotistical, then we know that she's capable of bringing those same traits and qualities to a college campus, and that's very attractive. And she kind of wraps up in terms of content. Again, she takes a step back and reflects on kind of the value of Buddhism, how it has changed over the course of her life, right? How her understanding of the topic has deepened. And again, this is an opportunity for us as admissions people to assess her ability to think critically, to think deeply about a topic. Not exhaustively, because again, we really only have one paragraph. The challenge in the personal statement is to say something of value in a very short period of time, 650 words, right? And to have the topic that you're discussing grow incrementally, again, over the course of the paragraph. So if we just look back from the beginning, you can see each paragraph has a very, very clear topic sentence, right? A very, very clear topic that we're just discussing in that paragraph. And then she uses these really elegant transitions to move from one idea to another. So the thing that I tell most of my students is that your personal statement really should be the best piece of writing that you've done, right? Up until this point, it should demonstrate the absolute pinnacle of your capacity as a writer. And writing really is a craft, so you want to give it some time, and we'll talk a little bit about time and timeline a little bit more. Now I want to talk briefly about style, right, and the different ways she uses language, because she uses language in a variety of different ways that I think are very important to identify. First, she's able to use kind of a creative, descriptive language, right? We have these, we have the incense-laden air. We have yellow-robed, solemn statues. We have just enough language for us to get a sense of place, right? So many of us may not have been to a monastery, we may not have seen monks. But again, just through these use of tiny images in the introductory paragraph, we're able to gain access to a place that is of meaning to her, right? But then she moves on. Then we get kind of a narrative component. This is a different kind of voice. She's telling us a story over the course of time. She's telling us one example of a moment where she went to a monastery and she's telling us what it's about. So it's just enough description, just enough exposition for us to get the detail necessary before she moves on to these other stories that she's going to share with us. Then again, she also has the instructive component, which is very, very useful and actually quite thoughtful of her, right? She's considerate enough of her audience to say, am I certain that my audience is going to know what meditation is? Well, maybe not, so I'll throw in a sentence to make sure that they have enough access to know what I'm talking about, right? So she's considerate of her audience, right? Which is very, very important. And then again, stylistically, then she's moving into a more, not so much abstract, but a considerate, thoughtful, intellectual frame of reference here to have a really elegant conclusion, right? So she uses, and this is very, very hit or miss to use a quotation in an essay. Sometimes it can be very, very poorly executed. But here we see, as the famous Zen saying suggests, when I eat, when I sleep, I sleep. And that really kind of is the definition of the simplicity that she's found through her Buddhist practice. So she's not necessarily saying it herself, but she's using reference. She's saying, here I am in relationship, in this dialogue with this long-term, or this very age-old tradition, and now I find myself being able to internalize some of those things. So again, I just want to leave you with these 3 tools. This is just kind of one example of a section of the application that you're going to want to spend a good deal of time on, because it is, again, the purpose is to say something. Just consider, could she have inferred that information from this personal statement anywhere else in her application, right? Could it come through in her grades? Probably not. Could it come through in her activities list? Probably not. Could it come through in her letters of recommendation? Do her teachers know that she meditates? Maybe not. Probably not. So this is really the place, this is the most appropriate place for her to discuss this content, and it contextualizes the rest of her application, right? So we know that she has solid GPA, she got into Harvard. We know that she has a 2320 on her SATs. And then we have the rest of her application to go on, and this is really kind of the glue that binds it all together. It provides context for everything else that we're reading in her application. Again, I just want to draw you back to thinking about these different themes, because this is, I think, a very important, very powerful framework to think about how the application is being assessed. Your academics, kind of obvious, but where are the opportunities that you as an applicant can find to express the things that are important to you? And if you don't know, that's totally fine. Now is a good time to start thinking about them. Now's the time to kind of investigate what are the, because did she know when she started practicing Buddhism that she was going to write her personal statement? Probably not. But by the time it came time to write her personal statement, was that an obvious strategic choice for her? Sure, yeah, it was a strategic choice, but it was also still very authentic, right? So these are the kind of things that we want to start thinking about when we're talking about a holistic or an intersectional approach to applying to college, one that is not just so hyper-focused on grades and achievement. Grades and achievement, obviously important, but the other aspects of character and of who you are and who you're going to be. And I think that's the last thing I want to comment on in this personal statement, is this sense of trajectory, right? So we know where she started, and then she leaves us again at the end of the personal statement with us being able to assess what kind of person she is probably going to become, right? So if we know that she's come this far developmentally in her personal statement and is able to articulate that, we as an admissions committee can then infer her continued character and values development, right? So what you demonstrate through your personal statement should leave us with a sense of your trajectory and where you're going to be going. So why do we talk about character when we talk about applications? I think there are a few very kind of unique aspects to an American education that are very, very important. When we're looking at recommendations, there are a few kind of standout words. And again, the most important thing about recommendations is that they're adults talking to adults, right? You're getting not necessarily an objective reference, but you have someone who can speak on your behalf who has seen you grow and seen you change within an academic context and a community context. So that reference of saying not just is this student academically exceptional, but they're also exceptional in their ability to contribute to the education of others is absolutely vital, because education in the United States, undergraduate education in the United States, is so very collaborative. And that's in some ways unique to an American education, to a liberal arts education. The idea that not just your schoolwork and your classwork, but in living with each other, in having these exchanges with diverse people, in sharing extracurricular experiences, you will be growing in fundamental ways. And so this idea of who you are, not just what you can do, is very valuable and kind of a crucial aspect. And then, of course, leadership and activities show that level of commitment. And again, we can infer your character from what you've chosen to dedicate yourself to over a period of years, right? So, and there's many, many different ways that we could talk about this. We could spend a long time talking about the difference between, a single day of volunteering at a soup kitchen, which has merit in and of itself, versus maybe the 12 years that you've spent studying the piano or the violin. Does that make sense? Right? So the quality of depth and commitment that you bring to an activity varies, and I think is more important in some cases than just breadth, right? So you kind of want to beware of just relating to just the check boxes in the activities list. We really want to find things where the student has demonstrated commitment. And maybe that means in 1 year you kind of are introduced to the activity, maybe that the next year you expand it, you take on a leadership component. There's many different ways we can assess it, but really we're looking at your ability to, what it has meant for you to dedicate some of your time over the course of years to a few choice things. This kind of brings us to what I think are two really important things to differentiate. This is the distinctive traits of an applicant versus the distinctive skills of an applicant. I think we're very focused in many ways on the skills of an applicant. We're looking at students who are intellectually brilliant, academically brilliant, and that's all good and very important. But when we're beyond intellectually engaged, we're also looking at people who are engaged in their community and also people who are academically rigorous. Those are things that we all kind of know intuitively. But as traits, we're looking at things like self-awareness. We're looking at things like authenticity and our ability to take initiative. Are you able to assess your community and see, is there something missing, and can I fill that missing, right? This is really the thing that separates students who are academically proficient and students who are maybe being admitted to the top tier universities. Because as we all know, the grades don't necessarily get you in every year. People who have perfect test scores, perfect GPA are routinely rejected. So the question is, why are they rejected? And oftentimes it comes down to not having demonstrated the personal qualities that the admissions office is really looking for in future members of their community. When we talk about values, one of the things I want to point out is values change over time, right? Our values are not necessarily something that are stagnant. We're not born with them. They're things that are influenced by our environment. They're influenced by our experiences. But one of the things that the application process provides an opportunity for is to actually become aware of your values, assess them, and articulate them. And if you can articulate them somewhere in your application, then we can again get that sense that we know how they might change and how those values might impact the community. What's difficult about values is they're kind of intangible, right? We don't necessarily have a GPA or a metric for values, but they are nonetheless extremely valuable. And we kind of all know intuitively how valuable values are, right? So the ways in which we are able to identify them and then articulate them in our application infers, again, self-awareness and our ability to reflect on how our experiences have been valuable for us. And then that, again, infers how we'll show up in our community. So you can see how these things are all kind of tying together a little bit. Some of these things are obvious, but they bear stating. Because essay writing in general, is a craft, right? It's kind of an art form. It's important to start early and to stay open. So the draft that you have just read is the final draft, and she probably went through 6 iterations of this draft. So it's not that you sit down, you have a blank page, and then you write genius, right? Genius does not happen unless you're Steinbeck or whatever. But the genius comes through revision. And in order to have time for revision, you have to start early. And you also have to kind of practice a sort of non-attachment, right? She has paragraphs that she wrote that didn't make it into this essay. So the act of cutting and removing material that's not serving your overall purpose is vital, super vital. But in order for that to happen, you have to start early. Related to starting early, you want to ask for feedback early, not late. If you're going to be asking people for feedback, that includes teachers, that includes your parents, whoever it may be, don't ask for feedback on a final draft. If you're just about to submit your essay, that's not the time for feedback. Feedback is something when you have a rough draft or you're brainstorming or talking about topics or you have a second draft, ask for feedback then. But always ask for specific and targeted feedback. Say, do these topics make sense next to each other? Is my grammar correct, right? Is my phrasing sound authentic? Does it sound stilted, right? But don't just give it to 6 different people and say, what do you think? Because you'll get six different opinions, right? And oftentimes they will conflict with one another. So in order to get the most out of your feedback, you want to be very specific and targeted about what you want, and you want to ask for it early. And then once you've kind of committed to your trajectory, stay there. The other thing that I think is super important is something that I call content mapping that I do with all my students. you're going to have, let's say you're applying to 10 to 12 schools, you're going to have anywhere between 5 and 6 different kinds of supplementary essays, right? And your supplementary essays might be anywhere from describe an extracurricular activity to what are your favorite books to why do you want to go to this school. It's important to map out all the different topics that you might talk about or that you consider invaluable to talk about in advance so that you're not conflicting or being redundant in your material. So juxtapose your personal statement content with what you might be writing in your supplements. Don't write your personal statement, finalize it, put it aside, never look at it, and then get started on your supplementary essays, because they need to be working in concert with one another. Again, I mentioned writing is an art form. Give it time to clarify and distill. And by give it time, I really do mean give it time. It's totally fine and in fact encouraged to brainstorm, get a draft together, get it to like a place where you're happy, then put it away for a month, several weeks, right? Give your brain time to reset so that you can approach the material with fresh eyes. Very, very important. And then finally, if necessary, if you know that writing is not your strong suit, work with a coach, right? Many students, particularly engineering science students who haven't been cultivating the process of writing, I mean, it's a little bit ridiculous, right? Let's just be frank, that students are asked to write this personal statement. It's a form that most students have never encountered, but it is in many ways one of the most important aspects of your application. And the first time you're going to do it is in some ways the most important moment for you to do it. So it stands to reason that some practice, some coaching, some skill and training in how to write a personal statement, how to write in that form, well before you actually need to, is a valuable use of your time. I want to shift gears here a little bit and talk a little more specifically about the Singaporean system and academics in general, because Singapore has a pretty unique system. When we're talking about GPA and academics in general, there's two things to consider. On the one hand, you have your overall GPA. On the other hand, the schools that you will apply to will weight their GPA their own way, right? So they're assessing applicants from all over the world, and they need to figure out a way to have a baseline to measure all their students against one another. They're probably not going to use your school's GPA. They use their own system. That's fine. The other thing that's important to consider is that your transcript, and this gets a little bit tricky in JC, but just stick with me for a second. Your transcript indicates growth over time, right? So imagine we were in the American system for a moment and you actually had something called freshman year. Your freshman year grades are contextualized by your junior year grades, right? So if you're showing an upward trend, again, so much of this has to do with trend and trajectory, and your junior year grades are superlative and your freshman year grades were a little bumpy, that's maybe fine because it's shown that you've grown intellectually, you've learned from your mistakes, you've developed time management skills, study skills, right? The skills necessary, and it shows us that you're probably on an upward academic trajectory in order to be able to succeed in the rigors of college. That gets a little bit tricky when we're talking about the JC system, mostly because the timing doesn't work out terribly well. If you're JC2 and you're applying to college, your A-levels aren't coming out until March of the following year. So you have a few different options, we'll talk about that in a moment. But mostly we're going to be using your prelim scores, right? So for most JCs, if you're applying and you're in the JC system and you're applying, you're going to be using your prelim scores as an assessment of what your A-levels are going to be. So you want to actually spend some time making sure that your preliminary scores do really well. And you'll also be you'll be sending your secondary transcript in addition. That's one of the major distinctions between the American system or the Western system and the JC system, is you have these 2 extra years on top of your secondary school, but both of those transcripts get sent. Then we have standardized test scores, which we'll talk about a little bit later. This is a kind of a proposed timeline. If you're in the Singaporean system, if you're in the JC system, this is what I want you to think about in order to reduce stress, right? In order to have the least anxious, least pressured time. It's really this area, term 2 break in June, is the moment when you want to be doing the bulk of your application material. Fortunately, if you're applying to American universities, the Common Application, which is the main portal you'll be applying through, has already released their essay prompts. So you can get the majority of your essays done in June. The reason is June finishes, July starts, you're prepping for prelims. August, you're in prelims. August passes, September starts, oh, all of a sudden you're prepping for A-levels. And then October starts, October, November, and then the beginning of December, you're taking A-levels, depending on what topics you're studying, right? To take A-levels and then not start your applications until the beginning of December for January 1st deadlines gives you very, very little wiggle room in order to adjust any of your material, right? So if you want to revise, if you want to do any kind of soul searching or some digging into your values, you don't have a lot of time to do that if you're waiting until December to work on your applications. So in March of the following year, when your A-levels actually do come out, you'll send those, but mostly your application is done. You'll send that as an update. But March is, when A-levels come out, is about 3 weeks, 4 weeks before decisions are released, regular decisions are released anyway. So this is just all to say, think ahead. In March of JC2, you want to be doing your thinking about your school list, your fit. We'll talk about standardized test timeline in a moment. And I'm certainly happy to answer any questions later. But this is kind of the timeline that is ideal. And I know that many students will not necessarily follow it because they won't necessarily have the opportunity. But if you have the opportunity, June is the time to put yourself in a position where you're really successful and you have your essays, done in a good place before the deadlines roll through. So that's it basically for all the useful material that I wanted to tell you about. I just want to tell you very briefly about myself, my background. My name's Luke, super happy to be here. I run a team called Spark Prep. We do what I like to call holistic admissions coaching. The real focus here is on supporting students on discovering a sense of themselves, clarifying their values, deepening their sense of purpose. Why are they even going to a four-year college? What's the real value in that? We work with clients throughout Southeast Asia, really across the world, and the United States. Our team is comprised of specialists who've gone to the best universities in the world, including Yale, Harvard, Stanford, Columbia. And we've worked with more than 100 students who have all been admitted to top universities all around the world. The basis for our pedagogy really is this inquiry-based approach to applications. What is the social value of education? How does higher education serve to cultivate and develop the individual, right? Some of these kind of very difficult questions, but really valuable questions to at least plant the seeds in students, because those are the seeds that will kind of blossom throughout their 4 years in college and beyond. How do we assess fit in a world focused on prestige, and how can we even use the admissions process to be valuable, right? Some people are already poised to think of applications as stressful, as hyper-competitive, as extremely fraught with anxiety. And our proposal is, what would it be like to relate to the application process in a way that was liberating or was full of discovery rather than distress? Thank you very much for your time. I will be happy. We're going to take questions at the end, and I will be happy to talk to you more then. So thank you very much.